From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on looking and feeling your best when your vision has sunk to bat level. And now, the podcast host who has no such eyesight insecurities when he's scoping out the babes at the gym, Pete Dominic!
Oh, yeah, man. It is really awkward. I'll be sitting there lifting some kind of heavy weights, squatting or benching something, and some attractive woman will walk by, and I'll have to adjust my glasses to stare at her until she gets so uncomfortable she joins another gym. That's me. You've nailed me again, Pete, as you always do. Your vision is getting to bat level. Well done, sir. As always. Great to see you, Pico, and everybody else at last night's hangout. If you wonder why the Friday show is sometimes up a little later in the morning, that's why, because I hung out with, like a bat, so many, almost 50 people last night, I think, at our party for almost 3 hours. It was so much fun. We had so many laughs. We had some serious conversations about issues that are in the news and that some of us are dealing with. And we had some very poignant moments as well. Always a great time at the hangout. I would say it's worth $5 a month to go to one or all four of those that I host every month. I don't know, but you don't have to say anything. You just could sit there and keep your camera off, and a lot of people do. It's still fun, and people show up week after week because we have such an amazing community of people. So join us. Sign up right now, standupwithpete.com. Welcome to new subscribers this week and last week. Several new subscribers. Great to have you guys joining us. And if you're interested in joining several of other listeners who have been working really hard to help promote the show, especially through this video effort that we're putting out clips of video all week, then join what we're calling the Street Team, led by Matt Carlson and Dr. Barry Hummel, who helped come up with it. Tina Winsett's on board. Several others have shown interest, and we'd love to have you joining us. And we talk a couple times a week and talk about the show and how we can get more videos out there and promote the show. It's super helpful. It's crowdsourced. I want this show to stay independent, supported by subscribers and listeners. That's how I've always wanted it to be, but I need your support. So sign up now for a subscription or be a part of our Street Team or come up with some other idea. Awesome show for you today. I've got contributing writer to The New Yorker and author of the new book, The Storm is Here, an American Crucible. Luke Mogelson joins me for the first time, and such a good conversation that it was. And just real quick, the New York Times writes about this book. They say, in The Storm is Here, Luke Mogelson, contributing writer for The New Yorker who has covered wars in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, does indeed report the events on our battlefield at home. Going beyond the events of January 6th, he shows how such protesters often proudly bond in communities of imagined apocalypse. More broadly, he traces a disturbing link between mobilized extremists, the dominant faction of the Republican Party, and the big lie. It is such a good book. We had a really good conversation. If I do say so myself, I did a pretty good interview that I asked him good questions. That was a good one. Very happy about that. That's coming up in just a moment. And then after that, we wrap up the week or close out the week with comedians Ophira Eisenberg and Christian Finnegan. And I can't remember laughing this hard this many times as I did in this conversation. I'll try to get some video clips out of that later, but you're going to love to listen to that conversation and laugh along with us. I hope you're doing well. I am so happy to have you listening. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Would love to connect with anybody who listens to this show that I put together every day in my garden shed behind my house. So reach out anytime and check us out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. I'm on all of those. So check us out. Pete Dominic, Stand Up with Pete Dominic. And thank you to all of my guests this week, by the way. If you missed any of them, Tim Wise, amazing. Noel Kasler, amazing. That was Thursday and Wednesday. Then I had Jared Yates Sexton and Bill B in D.C. Bill was amazing last night at the Hangout, too. But that was a great one. And, of course, on Monday at Mara Quint and the great Big Barry Ritholt. So check out those shows from earlier this week. This is episode 683, and let's get it going. I mean, technically, I think it's been going for a few minutes, but you're going to love this Luke Mogelson interview. He actually has reported from war zones all over the world. He lived in Kabul, Afghanistan for 3 years from 2011 to 2014 and reported regularly for the New York Times. where he's a contributing writer. His work at the New York Times earned him a National Magazine Award in 2014. Since then, he's a reporter from Syria, West Africa, and Iraq for The New Yorker. He won the 2013 Livingston Award for Young Journalists. He's received many other awards as well, and an award from the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. But you got to get his new book, which we talked about today. The Storm is Here, an American Crucible. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you, for the first time on Stand Up, author, journalist, super smart, very brave guy, Luke Mogelson.
Wow, I've got him, Luke Mogelson. Thank you so much for joining me. This is such an important book. I'm psyched to meet you, and I think this is the first time I've ever interviewed you. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Pete. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, man, I'm fascinated with your whole career, and obviously that led up to this. But just, you grew up in America. It seems like you had a pretty quintessential childhood in California and Idaho, and you've seen it all in America. And at some point, you decided to go live in foreign lands and cover war. And you're one of the most respected war correspondents working today. Certainly, American war correspondents, if you allow for me to call you that, conflict reporters. But why would you get into that?
Well, I'm 39 right now. So I was 19 when September 11th happened and the war in Afghanistan started. And I had a lot of friends who joined the military at that point, and who ended up serving overseas. And I think, like a lot of young Americans at that time, I felt both guilty for being so insulated, like the rest of the country, from these conflicts that my country was waging in other countries and other parts of the world. And then also just as an aspiring writer at that point, I wanted to see that and experience it. And so it was something, that had kind of nagged at me since 2001. And it just took me, basically 10 years to work up the gumption to just head over there.
What did you do in that 10 years?
Well, I went to college. I was it was my first day of my first semester of college was September 11th. So I was busy studying for the next 4 years. And then in subsequent summers after graduating, I worked on commercial fishing boats in Alaska and then tugboats in New York, and work trade jobs and this and that, like aspiring writers do to pay the bills and just find time to write.
You've reported from so many different war zones, including most recently. I mean, I could talk to you because I covered all of them, never went to any of them, but talked to people, reporters and journalists and veterans and others who did. And I could talk to you about Iraq or Afghanistan, Syria, or many of these places for a long time, and I'd love to. But I just want to ask you one question right now about Ukraine, because I've got Luke Mogelson. He's been reporting from there. He's one of the best. And my main question is just about the reporting itself. You turn on cable news or television news and you see a lot of, quote, experts and former generals and so on, and a lot of punditry and talking about what is happening and what might happen. You're on the ground there. You saw what happened. You report for The New Yorker. What do you think is wrong, or maybe I'm making an assumption, with some of this kind of in-studio former, combat veteran speculating about places they may or may not be familiar with, versus you, who've covered all these different war zones and are reporting on the ground in Ukraine? Because I think people got a lot of stuff wrong.
Well, I have to say that after 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan and the way that turned out, I'm kind of surprised that anyone in the U.S. is still listening to former generals or commanders that were involved in, leading those catastrophic interventions, especially when they're talking about a country where they've probably never been. And, I was actually in Kyiv at the very beginning, at the very outbreak of the war. I left the day that the Russians started shelling across the border and got to Kyiv a couple days later on March 1st, or maybe even the last day of February. And at that point, for that whole week, everybody, not just the pundits, but also my sources and military intelligence were saying, you got to get out of there. Kyiv's going to fall in 48 hours. The Russians are, they're either going to have a complete encirclement of the capital and devastate it with shelling, or they'll just be in the city and the Zelensky government will fall, and they're going to start hunting down, foreigners in the streets and everything. So that was a rather unanimous reading of the situation in late February and early March. And obviously they were dead wrong about that. So again, the fact that those folks are still on TV giving their opinion doesn't surprise me. But I guess the fact that people are listening to them does.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, at what point do you lose your credibility? So after you predict something's going to happen and it happens disastrously different or opposite of what you predicted, no matter how much experience or quote credibility you have, what do you consider your responsibility when reporting from any of these foreign countries, specifically, Ukraine? What are you trying to do for your reporting?
Well, I try not to make predictions, first of all. It's one lesson I've learned. No, but I'm very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to work for a place where I can spend 2 months, even 3 months on one story and really get to know people and embed myself either with military units or in a civilian community, and just kind of take the time to build up a level of trust and intimacy that you need for people, not just in war zones, but anywhere, to let you into their lives. And it's especially critical in conflict zones if you want to do frontline reporting like I try to do, because access is tough. Like something a lot of people don't realize is that you have to work really hard to get to a live front line anywhere. It's not easy. You can't just be willing to go.
Give me an example. Like what do you mean?
Well, because commanders and platoon leaders and even just infantry soldiers in any country, in any conflict, they're worried about OPSEC, operational security. They're very, very leery of journalists. And if you're an American, the last thing they want in a lot of these countries is to be responsible for or involved in, an American reporter's death if you do something stupid and get yourself killed or kidnapped, et cetera. So you're a liability for these units. I mean, you're not really helping them by being a reporter. From their perspective, they have much more pressing, concrete, tactical, strategic concerns, and they're trying to stay alive. So you're not bringing too much to the table. If nothing else, you're an extra mouth to feed. So just to convince, people both at the ground level and then at the command level to let you spend time on real front lines, not, 2 kilometers back, is hard. It takes work and it takes time. It takes contact. It takes contacts. So yeah, I'm fortunate in that, with the New Yorker, we don't have to pump out daily content, and I can devote that kind of time to gaining access to some of these places and then really hang out once I get there.
One more question just about general, journalism and the kind that you've done. What about your point of view? What about your bias? What about your preferences? If it's in Ukraine, how do you report on the Russian soldiers? If you're in Afghanistan and you're covering Marines in Fallujah versus an insurgency, how do you cover that, much less in Afghanistan with the U.S. against the Taliban? I mean, it's pretty easy to say in a certain place that America is the aggressor. Certainly in Iraq, I think it's easy to say that. How do you, as a reporter, be as objective as you can, or keep your own point of view out of it, or don't you?
It's difficult, and it's something that I've been, evolving with and learning over the years. Certainly when I first arrived in Afghanistan, I think that I had a lot of biases and pro-American and sympathies for the American project in Afghanistan that, I didn't fully examine. So yeah, over time, you just try to be as aware as you can of, the biases that you're bringing, and especially as an American, as a Westerner. But that said, you also can't shy away from recognizing when, like in Ukraine, when there's a clear-cut aggressor and a clear-cut victim, which is how I feel after, months of reporting there, the situation is in Ukraine.
So much more I want to ask you about all of that. Of course, a lot of the book is about January 6th and what led to it. And you were kind of on the path to it in many different ways I'll talk about. And your videos from inside the Capitol, I don't know if anybody's got more views than the kind of access that you had. But before I get to that, I do want to talk to you about why you went to Michigan and why you reported and what you learned in Minneapolis, because all of this leads up to January 6th, and obviously it's ongoing. So the storm is here is the title of the book, but you've been inside the storm. Why did you come back to America to report on this, though?
Well, you might remember early in the pandemic, on April 30th, there was an anti-lockdown, one of the first big anti-lockdown rallies in the country with armed militia members and other extreme right-wingers at the Michigan State House in Lansing. And they entered the Capitol building. They were kitted out, in flak jackets and bearing assault rifles, and they squared off against police in front of the barred doors of the legislature. And when I saw those images from that day, I think, that same day I sent my editor an email asking if I could go to Michigan just to see what that was all about. Because, yeah, you have to remember this was very early in the pandemic, early in 2020. So before the election, before George Floyd was killed. And these people were already furious.
I remember that well. I'm so glad you reminded me, though, of the date. I didn't realize kind of where it fell, but for two reasons I remember it well. One, because the President of the United States tweeted, I believe, "Liberate Michigan," something like that. And two, because I interviewed Senator Mallory McMorrow, and I hadn't known this before I talked to her, but there's a horrible picture of a man, as you say, kitted up inside the ornate state capitol chamber. He's in there with a gun, looking down on actual state senators. I couldn't believe that happened. I don't remember it being reported. I'm not saying it didn't at the time, but to me, that was a stark example of the danger, the fact that was legal for someone to go inside the Capitol during those hearings and being there armed.
You're talking about the big guy with the sleeveless shirt and the kind of mohawk with an assault rifle. He's in the gallery of
he's in the gallery. I don't remember. Was there more than I don't know what I forget, but
Well, that guy. I later met that guy. He's named William Knoll, and he was a member of the Michigan Liberty Militia. And he had a really interesting trajectory over the course of 2020, which was kind of representative of the broader anti-lockdown movement. The day after that rally, that event, the Michigan Senate leader, a Republican named Mike Shirkey, he condemned all those guys, called them a bunch of jackasses, and said that they were a threat to democracy, et cetera. Well, I arrived in Michigan a few days later, and about a week after I arrived, there was the exact same groups, the Michigan Liberty Militia and others, held another rally in Grand Rapids, and Mike Shirkey was a speaker. He was the keynote speaker, and he stood on a stage next to William Knoll, this guy that you're just describing, who had been in the gallery with an assault rifle, and he told William and other members of the militia that what they were doing was important, and that, quote, "We need you now more than ever." So fast forward another couple of months, and William Knoll was charged for his role in the alleged kidnapping plot of the Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
I mean, as you're talking about it, and as I've been, and maybe you made the comparison and you probably didn't because it's almost insulting in a way, but I'm going to cheapen it. Your experience and expertise in that. A lot of people in America, certainly liberals and progressives, talk about these guys, these militant American militants, and they compare them to those that you covered in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, even Ukraine, I suppose. Al-Qaeda, they say. I don't think it's a terrible comparison, but you've covered both. How would you connect dots? Or do you think it's ridiculous to even make these comparisons?
Yeah, no, I don't think we're there yet. And, even January 6th, it was hand-to-hand combat, it was brutal. It was brutal and it was real violence. Weapons, crude weapons were definitely used. I saw that with my own eyes. I don't mean to diminish it, but it's categorically different from, a shooting war or shooting combat. That said, I heard several people say that day at the Capitol, next time we're coming back with guns. And so I think that it's easy to get from where we are to more higher levels of violence. Something that's interesting with the Proud Boys in particular, but some of these other groups as well, is their use of paintball guns when they clash with anti-fascists and Black Lives Matter activists, especially in the Pacific Northwest. I saw this while I was reporting in Portland over the summer. These guys would come to town, again, kitted out in tactical gear, looking like soldiers, except instead of real guns, they had paintball guns. And I don't know if you've seen a paintball gun recently, but they're made now to resemble carbines and assault rifles. So it's almost this kind of play acting of combat, and they would ride around in pickup trucks and shoot at counter protesters with these paintball guns. But to get from there to a real gun, I think is very easy. And in fact, just last summer in Portland, the Proud Boys came to town again and were battling with anti-fascists, and one of them pulled out a real gun and shot at the demonstrators, who, by the way, returned fire with their own real guns.
I mean, I just looked up paintball guns. I used to love playing paintball. I still do. I wish I could play. I think it's really fun, but I'm going to just hold this up to the camera for people watching, maybe wherever I release this clip. I mean, these guns, I had no idea. That's so stupid at this point. Like, if you've got a fake gun, make it be hot, make it look like a fake gun. But whatever. I mean, the point is taken. That being said, Luke, you are one of the few people, I don't know, maybe there's a couple other reporters, but it's got to be just a handful, if that, that has covered these foreign conflicts, as I mentioned, but also was in Portland, in Minneapolis, in Michigan, and of course, in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. So my question to you is, when people make the comparison between what you witnessed covering it as a journalist in Portland and in Minneapolis, which were mostly what I would call the civil rights movement protests of our era, Black Lives Matter, versus January 6th and what happened there. You've heard those comparisons over and over. Why do we ignore what happened in Minneapolis? They were burning the cities and focus so much on Washington, D.C., January 6th. What do you hear, being that you've covered them all? You were at all of them.
Yeah. Well, I'd say the Minneapolis January 6th comparison is particularly disingenuous for two reasons. One is just the relative legitimacy of their grievances, right?
Right.
I mean, Minneapolis was an uprising by Black Americans against a police force that had been habitually abusing them and literally killing them, not just George Floyd, but Philando Castile and Jamar Clark and others. And, January 6th was an uprising against a legitimate election that they believed was stolen. It was based on a fantasy injury. So those are two very different things.
You're being very generous and nuanced, and I appreciate that. But I'll simplify it by saying that there was an actual grievance which generation of Americans has seen with abuse of Black Americans, especially, but everybody else too, me, by law enforcement. An actual grievance versus a complaint about a thing that didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, the most kind of obvious, important distinction.
Yeah.
But then also what physically happened and the way that those two uprisings, if you want to call them that, actually unfolded were very different as well. In Minneapolis, it's true. There was rioting. I mean, I feel comfortable calling it that. There was looting. There was vandalism. There was almost no violence perpetrated against human beings. Almost no attacks, physical attacks on law enforcement agents. In contrast, there were more than 90 protesters who were hospitalized because they had been brutalized by police. And by the way, most of the protesters in Minneapolis who were severely injured, it was, one guy lost an eye. There were a bunch of traumatic brain injuries, like serious stuff. They were peaceful protesters. They weren't the rioters, because the riots only lasted 2.5 days. And the police during that time, they were MIA. They weren't doing anything. And then, when they came out in force with the National Guard and the state troopers and just started viciously attacking protesters, there was no more rioting. They were peaceful gatherings. And, adolescents had to go to the hospital. Elderly women had to go to the hospital. So you can't compare that with, what took place at the Capitol on January 6th, which was the exact inverse. You had 140 law enforcement agents who had to be hospitalized and almost no Trump supporters.
What I think I heard you say is that there were some riots for 2.5 days, and then folks stopped rioting, and that's when the police attacked them? When they were being peaceful?
Yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
What about the kind of thing that we heard over and over and continue to hear, that those cities were being burned down, specifically Portland and Minneapolis, you heard a lot about. And my understanding was it was constrained to just a few blocks in each of those cities, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, in Minneapolis, there were a lot of fires, structural fires. Mm-hmm. And by the way, not for nothing, the first known incidents of arson in Minneapolis on the first day of rioting was attributed by law enforcement to a white man who was later identified as a member of the Aryan Cowboys, a neo-Nazi prison gang.
It'll never be reported enough. Because once you see a thing and learn a thing, you rarely get the correction or the reversal. And I've heard so many people try to point to that, and it's such an important thing to mention, because sometimes the match is lit by someone who should get the blame and doesn't, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, that's not it's not to try to whitewash what happened or to say that there wasn't vandalism and fires, because there were. But in Portland specifically, it was, at the time that Trump was telling America that the entire city was on fire and that Portland was a beehive of terrorists, to use his words, I was there going out every night with the anti-fascist protesters and Black Bloc. And most nights there were a couple dozen people, and they would yell at the police. The police would, attack them, and they'd go home. Maybe once a week, somebody would, break a window or spray paint a couple buildings. So, you can't. It's important to recognize that Trump and his allies over the summer were engaged in a very deliberate effort to dramatically exaggerate the threat posed by quote unquote Antifa to histrionic proportions.
Yeah.
in order to distract people, A, from the pandemic that was raging out of control under his scattershot management, and B, from the demands for racial justice that were spreading across the country in the wake of George Floyd's killing.
I wonder if you've seen anything like this in your foreign reporting or can reference it about history, but most leaders, mayors, governors, and presidents try to de-escalate this type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was making up things that weren't happening and tweeting them out. He was demanding people rise up and, quote, liberate Michigan. And obviously, everybody knows what he said on January 6th. He escalated so much. There's just no denial about it, whether it be on social media or in speeches. And it definitely had an effect. You as a reporter must have seen it. I mean, is it fair to connect those dots?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, when I was in Portland during this time that I was just speaking about, I spent some time with Proud Boys, and they were a minor kind of fringe organization that engaged in, you know, street brawls with, you know, a couple dozen anti-fascists once a month or once every other month. But the effect of Trump, you know, villainizing Antifa to these cartoonish proportions was that the Proud Boys were suddenly seen to be fighting and resisting this threat to national security. And their recruitment exploded. Their organization, they opened up chapters all over the country. Yep. And by the time the Million MAGA March came around, you might remember on November 14th in DC, you had hundreds and hundreds of Proud Boys from all over the country proudly marching through the United States Capitol and harassing and attacking Black pedestrians, vandalizing historic Black churches, and feeling, you know, just really energized by a sense of impunity and a conviction that they had the support of the President of the United States.
Crazy. One of the great things.
And by the way, just to illustrate that a little bit further, you know, when I first encountered the Proud Boys over the summer in 2020 in the Pacific Northwest, their Parler account, which was like the kind of right-wing alternative to Twitter at the time, you know, had a few thousand followers on it. And by the time they were mobilizing in DC a few months later in November and December, they had 250,000 followers.
It's so important. It's so important. There's so much more of this important reporting in your new book. One of the things that I think makes you a great reporter is that you're able to get into the actual spaces and build the kind of credibility and trust with whoever you're covering that they don't turn around and shoot you. I think that that's evidenced in your videos that we see from inside the Capitol, but it's also true of what you're talking about, Portland, Minneapolis, and everywhere else that you went to. So my question is, you mentioned Antifa. Tell me a story. Tell me something you learned covering them. I'm not going to call it embedding them, but you were covering them. You were talking to them. You were getting to know them. You were watching them and reporting on them. Fair to say?
Yeah. I had the same approach with Antifa that I did with, you know, the Proud Boys, which is I just showed up for all of their publicly held events, which were nightly at that point, and would talk to them in that context. Yeah.
I think my brother is the original Antifa. I'll tell you more about him another time, but like he's a leftist, an anarchist, and has all kinds of, I'll call them alternative views, most of which I respect. But the difference I see with what you've covered with the, whatever we want to call it, far right, whether it be the Proud Boys, but certainly a lot of those guys who joined who were there on January 6th or at Michigan, what I'm hearing from those guys is crazy QAnon stuff, really wild beliefs that they truly seem to believe. And I guess my question is, how does that compare to the kind of folks that you covered in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria and what they believe? So the question is about what Antifa believes. It's kind of a moral thing. or philosophical. These guys believe that the moon is made of cheese, and I'm not sure even Al Qaeda believes that. They're religious extremists, but they don't. Do they believe a thing happened that didn't happen, or that a person exists that didn't exist, or that JFK Jr. is going to come back, Luke?
Yeah, there actually are a lot of conspiracy theories, I think, among extremists globally. But one thing I'd say is that a big difference between the far right groups that you're talking about and people like your brother, extreme leftists, is religion. And, religion and Christian evangelicalism is a big part of the far right. And you don't have that on the far left. Whether or not you agree with the radical solutions that some leftists propose for the systemic problems in our country, i.e., tearing it all down and starting over with a system other than capitalism. They're not out there saying that we need to do this, because Jesus Christ would want us to do it. So it's more of a kind of rational basis. Whereas on the far right, they're really, in my experience at least, animated by a kind of righteousness that is religious in nature. And a result of that is that they view their adversaries, their political opponents, as kind of not just wrong in their ideas, but morally corrupt and
pedophiles.
And pedophiles on the side of a spiritual kind of evil.
Right. Yes. I've been accused of it for weeks at a time. And they call you. Yeah,
exactly. But once you're in that mode, and once you see, the other side that way, there's no room for compromise. The only solution is to fight, and also, and to vanquish your enemy, and also, respect for the democratic process and the will of the majority. Right. And democratic institutions suddenly feels like a quaint kind of notion, because you're now engaged in this eternal cosmic struggle between good and evil. And I do believe that a lot of these guys on the far right move through the world that way.
You were in DC on January 16th. You were at the rally. And correct me if I get any of this wrong, you went up to the Capitol and you yourself climbed through the window that was broken by, it turns out, apparently, I think, and you're right about this, one of the Proud Boys. We know so much more. And a lot of what we know or saw is because you covered it all, I think, with your iPhone at that point. And I'm glad that you mentioned that religion point, because I was watching in preparation to talk to you about your awesome new book. I was watching some of the videos that you took, and there you are in the Senate chamber with just a handful of guys, including the Q shaman dude with the horns. And I think it's him. Somebody leads them in prayer in that Senate chamber. And I thought
it's him, yeah.
At that moment, I was like, the fact that happened and that most of them in that chamber bowed their head along with him in that chamber was evidence as to what you're saying. It's hard, but it's not true of the whole movement, because even in that video, I'm sure you've seen this, but I kind of started laughing when I was watching it today. All these guys bow their head, but then you panned over to the right and you see this guy texting, and he's not paying any attention because he's not moved by someone praying. Maybe I'm making assumptions. The point I'm trying to make is that not everybody is this crazy Christian nationalist type, but it's a huge influence and at play. And what could be more emblematic than that moment that you captured on video? So I want to ask you anything about that. And then more importantly, have you been contacted by the FBI? Have you been subpoenaed to share all the footage you have?
After the New Yorker published that 13-minute clip edit of all the raw footage I took on January 6th. The FBI reached out and asked to see the rest of it, but I said no. And then that was the end of it. They didn't subpoena me or try to obtain it.
Why did you say no?
Well, there's a lot of incriminating video on there, and that's not my job. I'm not here to put people in jail. And I'm certainly not here to do the FBI's job for them, because that becomes a very slippery slope. Even if I, think that these guys are a threat to the country and deserve to be in jail, if I cooperate with law enforcement in this context, then suddenly they might ask, what if they ask for my footage from Minneapolis? What if they ask for my footage from Portland? I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm picking and choosing, which of my subjects I most sympathize with, and deciding on that basis whether or not to be complicit in, their prosecutions and imprisonment.
I think some listeners might not understand that, but what you just shared is, I think, a general journalistic ethic, and I would imagine your editors and Remnick and everybody else at the New Yorker, much less Vanity Fair, the New York Times, would all be on the same page with you on that.
Yeah, I think so. I don't find it too radical of a position. I was frankly very reluctant to even publish that 13-minute clip, and had to have a debate about it and be with my editors and be kind of talked into it, just because of what they viewed as the civic and historic value of, some of some of the footage. But yeah, I was ambivalent about even publishing that part of it. You write about where we're going to some extent, and you have a really good understanding, obviously, of history in this country and culture, much less the foreign countries that you've seen. And I wonder what you think of where we are headed. And I wonder specifically what role you think the January 6th committee investigation has played in all of this. Well, I think, unfortunately, most Americans probably already made up their minds about January 6th and about the election before the hearings aired. Which is too bad, because I found them actually incredibly useful for establishing a historical record of people's complicity and what happened. And above all, establishing the fact that, none of the purveyors of the big lie actually believed it. Like, nobody in Trump's world and in his inner circle thought the election was stolen. Not his daughter, not her husband, not his attorney general, not his lawyers. I don't think anybody in the administration outside of maybe Stephen Miller, and he probably didn't believe it, or Navarro. And I mean, they're just grifters. I mean, like they who knows? Yeah. But yeah. Yeah. So I think, that was incredibly important to establish that, because it was something I had always wondered about. I'm not a DC reporter. I don't have sources in the White House. So I'd always wondered, while spending time with the targets of that propaganda and the people receiving it and accepting it as true and then acting on it, of course, I had wondered, whether or not the architects of it actually believed it themselves. And now we know that they don't. I just thought of one more question I know that you have a take on I wanted to get, because you cover, again, you're unique. What you've covered and how you've covered it is unique to a large extent. You saw the police in Portland and Minneapolis, and then you saw the support for them, and you saw the police in Washington, D.C., and I guess the lack of support for them. I want to argue by a lot of the same people. I think that's fair to say at this point. What do you make of that? Yeah, it was very complicated on January 6th because you had, on the one hand, these incredibly violent confrontations and assaults against police officers. And then at other moments in the day and other places on the premises, police officers being pretty chummy with the rioters. And I think that, that was just reflective of a larger complexity in the relationship between law enforcement and Trump supporters that's just becoming more and more fraught, as time goes on. And we saw that recently with the condemnation of the FBI and FBI agents and the attempted attack on the FBI office in Ohio after the Mar-a-Lago search. But the most important thing to remember is that the extreme right in the U.S. has always been anti-law enforcement and has always seen state agents on the federal, but also the local level as, antagonists and people infringing on their individual rights. And I even saw that early on in Michigan, with anti-lockdowners viciously castigating and berating law enforcement officers charged with implementing some of these public health policies. And then after George Floyd was killed, those same groups, those same people pivoted 180 degrees to, backing the blue. But it was clearly always an alliance of convenience that collapsed the moment any law enforcement agent prevented them from doing whatever they wanted, basically. And I saw that in DC, not just on January 6th, but also on November 14th and December 12th. The problem, though, is that, I think a lot of law enforcement officers themselves identify with some of these movements.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. When you talked about the history of the far right and law enforcement, I think that's certainly true of the feds, any federal law enforcement agency. And yeah, it's true of local and state police too, to some extent, although it's not also, but we're talking about Ruby Ridge and Waco and Timothy McVeigh and so on. But I think what you just said is also really important, which is a ton of the people in this movement are active duty police officers. And this has been very well documented.
Yeah. Well, so what I was talking about before is like the traditional far right, which again, I think extreme right, radical right, whatever you want to call it, has always been pretty clearly anti-state, anti-government, anti-law enforcement, to the extent that law enforcement is a representative of the state. But what we've had under Trump is just the views, the attitudes, and the paranoias of the radical right being adopted and embraced by, the right writ large.
Yeah.
And promoted by a sitting president himself. Again, whenever any law enforcement agency or officer intrudes on or impedes their impunity, basically, to do whatever they want. So I think that as that radical right attitude becomes more and more mainstream among conservatives, among Republicans, you're going to see more and more law enforcement officers who previously, viewed the mainstream Republican Party as pro law enforcement. You're going to see them being put in these complicated, contradictory positions and situations, just like we saw on January 6th.
It's crazy. I'll let you go. But if you have anything to say about this, yesterday, Donald Trump called into some kind of a memorial or rally for January 6th perpetrator, specifically Ashley Babbitt, I think's family, if I have this right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much that matters to the point that you've seen the overall movement has turned these insurrectionists, criminals, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, but they did the wrong thing. Those who broke in and obviously vandalized and so on. And one of them was shot, Ashley Babbitt. She was shot by a law enforcement agent who's there. His job is to protect members of Congress. And that guy has been demonized by name by the former president of the United States. And she, Ashley Babbitt, has become a real martyr, not to mention some of these other guys, that are seen as victims. And I think, I'm not saying that we're surprised, but I think that's an important thing that you've covered, to just talk about how the opinion, and Trump himself now, talking about Ashley Babbitt was this great person. And no, she broke into the Capitol. She was a threat to Congress people, and she was killed as a result, a lot of people don't see it as that controversial. I don't know.
Yeah, and that officer, he's not just any officer, he's Lieutenant Byrd, and he was 22-year veteran of the Capitol Police. And, he went on NBC after his identity was outed by Trump supporters. And he said that, if he had been in a position to protect Trump and Trump's family from Ashley Babbitt and her fellow rioters the same way that he protected the fleeing lawmakers who were right behind him when he fired that single round, he would have done the same thing for Trump and Trump's family. And the way that Trump's supporters responded online was by hurling racial epithets at him, because also
he's black.
He's black, and I don't think that's just a passing detail.
No, that's not lost on anybody. Certainly not on my friend Harry Dunn, and black folks across the country. You see that. I think that's it's not our assumption. They called him names, words.
Yeah, exactly. And, the same politicians, Paul Gosar and others, and Trump, who, condemn Lieutenant Byrd for firing a single round at an insurrectionist trying to crawl through a window to get to fleeing lawmakers. Like, they also defended and celebrated and lionized Kyle Rittenhouse after he killed, protesters in Kenosha. So you don't have to look very hard to find, the hypocrisy in these positions. And sometimes it's literally just, skin deep.
I'm not sure how much the hypocrisy matters anymore, but it's also really important to point out. By the way, I'm surprised that you weren't in Kenosha. You've been everywhere else, Lou.
I think what happened, I was somewhere when Kenosha went down.
Did you get stuck in Sheboygan on the way there?
But missed it.
But that was just yet another American story playing out during this time. The storm is here, an American crucible. I love your work at the New Yorker. I love that magazine, but I really, really love this book, and I've learned so much that I didn't know, and I cover this stuff for a living. Congratulations, and please come back and join me again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Pete. That was great.
Oh, hell yeah, it sure was. That was awesome. Luke Mogelson, check out the book. Get the book right now. The storm is here, and I don't think Luke is on social media. I was surprised to see that, but I don't see him on Twitter. At least not publicly. I'll find out, and if so, we'll go thank him there. All right, now it's time to get to the last guests of the week, who are hilarious and brilliant comedians and good friends of mine, Ophira Eisenberg, Christian Finnegan. Go support them on social media. That's a big deal for comedians. Buy their albums. That's an even bigger deal for comedians. And if you get the opportunity to see them live, you won't be sorry. Here it is, O Finnegan, Christian Finnegan, Ophira Eisenberg.
I keep forgetting that I have to be camera ready for this podcast now.
Yeah, we're putting out a lot of video clips now, Christian. Ophira doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
I never think of it, and then I look at myself on the screen. I'm like, I don't know if this is ready to go out for mass consumption.
You are ready.
Thanks. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
I just got my haircut yesterday, so I'm trying to get as much out of it as I can.
What does that mean?
It's very nice.
What does that mean? You've only got a couple more days of that look?
Well, just the way they style it is especially because they style it as they cut. So it's I could never recreate how flat and straight it is.
How many hairdressers do both of you have you gone through in the last, say, few years? What are your are you and how do you break up if you do?
I don't go to the same stylist more than once. I like to.
What?
I'm joking. I'm like a celebrity with a dress. It's I can't go to the same stylist more than once. I'm sorry. You have an actual answer, Ophira.
I love that. No, seriously. How long have you been going to your person?
I'm kind of stuck. I actually am getting my haircut tomorrow. I'm kind of stuck with the person I don't like, but it's the kind of thing where I don't have someone better, and it's just every time it comes up, and I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Honestly, within a week, it always looks the same for me.
People have a hard time breaking up with the people that cut their hair. Pete, what was the last breakup you had with your hair cutter? What year was that?
Is it seventh grade?
I guess the closest thing I can even relate to is, I give a lot of blood. And I have this one nurse that I really like the way she draws it. That was my way of saying...
I will say I do get bummed. I really get bummed when a dude washes my hair. And it's not that I have any sort of... No, it's not that I have any sort of like latent homophobia or anything like that. It's just that like I so rarely get touched by a woman who's not my wife. And it's just like, it's not sexual. Yeah. But it's just nice to have a woman's hands on you every once in a while. It's just even for 7 minutes of just washing your hair. And
can't you just close your eyes and pretend they're just women's larger hands?
No, you can't. I agree. I agree with Christian. And to answer your question earlier, seriously, it's what I miss about doing TV regularly is that even though the closest thing I can come to a haircut is sitting in the makeup chair and same thing, they're touching you and they're talking to you. I definitely miss that kind of connection. One of the sexual hottest moments of my life was this woman who I started talking to, and she was a hairdresser, and she said, "Come to my house and I'll cut your hair." And she like cut my hair, but like put her leg between my legs. It was like the greatest thing in the world. It was like the perfect porn plot.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that was, what did you say? Grade 7th grade?
Well, then I tried to kiss her and she's like, "What do you think this is?" It was awkward.
Oh yeah. She was like $200.
You didn't actually, did you? You didn't, did you? No.
I'm not gonna tell you what happened. Or if any of that happened.
I never thought it would happen to me.
So lots to talk about this week in terms of what's happening in the world. I always want to know what's happening in your guys' world. But I gotta say, last week when we last talked, the Queen was alive and then she died right after we talked. And
minutes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whose fault is it?
Is it really only been a week? I cannot believe it's only been a week.
Yeah.
I'm at the point now where if I turn on the news and I hear a British accent, I just get angry.
You're already done with it.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? The long lines to go to the funeral and what people are going to see on their while they're in line.
I think if you're going to wait in line that long, you should at least get to like ride the casket on some sort of roller coaster type deal. Do you know what I mean? Like there should be like her royal fluminous sort of water ride or something.
Step up, step in. Let's check your height.
Amazing.
Keep your hands inside the casket.
6 tickets.
Have you found yourself accidentally paying attention and then being outraged like it did for me this morning when I found out they didn't let Prince Harry wear his military uniform where William and everybody else wore theirs, but Harry was actually, did things in a war and yet they stripped him. And I got outraged by that. And then I realized what was happening and I got recentered and thought of anything more important.
Right. You were just like, oh, wait, need to buy groceries or something.
Yeah, I was like, I can't believe what an injustice. Why am I thinking about things?
Yeah. I think Harry's going to be fine.
Yeah, Harry will be okay. It must be weird for Charles to be like, it took me, now I've got to work. Like I'm 73 years old. Now I got to do stuff.
Yeah.
And more importantly, now I can't give my opinion apparently on anything. Like he was a fairly outspoken guy apparently. And now he's not allowed to say anything because he's now the protector of the faith.
Wow.
Is that an actual term?
Yeah, he's it's the English whatever Church
of England.
Church of England that nobody goes to.
Anglican.
Apparently.
Yeah, Anglican. I grew up with Anglicans.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I knew Anglicans in Calgary, very British. I mean, Canada is very British.
Yeah.
So I knew Anglicans.
So what have you heard?
We made fun of them.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, because they were obviously created by the church, so as a reaction, so they could have divorce and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was Henry VIII. Basically, he wanted. If I'm talking way out of pocket here, but that he wanted a divorce and the church wouldn't grant it, and so he said, "Well, then we're now the Church of England."
Yep.
That was pretty much how it started.
Oh, that's awesome power.
Yeah.
That is using it for good, right? Well, I'll create a religion. Okay.
I don't know. I mean,
I guess that is happening here too.
the idea that you're forced by the state to stay.
The religion is called woke. I'm sorry.
By the way,
sorry,
unwoke.
That's me playing a character.
I hate that word has been hijacked and now it's a bad word because
I know.
It shouldn't be. Don't you, when you walk into a bookstore, if there are any left, or a library, don't you feel the feeling that you want to know what's in all those books? You have a curiosity. It's like an adult amusement park. You're like, oh, so many books. I'm so excited I wish I could learn all. And that's what I think woke is. Like, you want to learn stuff about anything. In this case,
true utter curiosity, right?
That's what I think it is.
I always interpreted it more as like wake up, see the world around you as it actually is, instead of what you've been told it is, of being kind of aware of the actual power structures and work against you. And when I say against me, I mean against people of color, not against me. Things pretty much work in my favor.
Or actually like awakening up, like it's not just all about you and your experience.
Right. Yeah.
Sure.
Be aware to the sort of powers.
That's much better said and more specific, but I still feel like you have to be a generally, quote, open-minded or curious person to wake up, to be awoken. I guess maybe not. You could have an experience.
Well, I mean, to regardless of what the free speech warriors talk about like, the marketplace of ideas and, we should all be able to say what we want.
My eyes.
The way none of those people want people to actually have an open mind, because an open mind would allow for the idea that maybe certain things need to change. And if certain things need to change, well, that could inconvenience me personally. And therefore I don't want that.
Right.
Ophira, you hate change.
That's interesting you say that. Doesn't everybody?
It depends on what you're talking about. I just changed my bedroom around and it's all I want to talk about. It has given me a new lease on life. I like certain kinds of change. I guess I don't. Wait a second.
You changed where the bed is and stuff like that? Like you moved around the furniture?
Well, one of the things No, I got a bed. I got a new bed, and I got a meditation chair, a chair that I like just to sit in, and I built a little desk for myself. But what the change you're talking about, that we're talking about, is like there's a lot more. Like I'm being replaced by younger brown comedians. I find that I don't like.
Yeah, I mean it is hard. It's. I mean, I'm not immune to sort of when the theoretical becomes literal, that all these power structures should change and we should revolt, or kind of, give more opportunities to different kinds of people. And then when it's time for me to look around and try to get a job, they're not around. I'm not at the top of anyone's list right now. Yeah. And that's, you make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, and sometimes you're the egg. And that is...
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I witnessed this thing where, there's often not a lot of women on lineups. I mean, it's getting better, but not a lot of women on lineups. And then someone was saying to me they had a lineup with a bunch of guys on it, and then a black female comic who's excellent. And I was like, oh, that's great that you got that person. They're like, yeah, it's so great when you can book like a female comic that is also of color, because then it's like 2 for 1. And I was like, oh my God, what?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
What's sad is that represents progress.
What's sad? What's really sad is that Ophira yelled out, "Did you know I'm Jewish?"
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. I have some Cherokee blood in me. I love it when people throw that. Do you find that people are really? I mean, I don't want to take away from anyone's background, but sometimes when someone in their act is like, "I'm 1/16, Puerto Rican," you're just like, "Okay, come on now." You're just using that to like put yourself in a certain...
It's like, if other people don't see it, then I don't think you should get credit for it. Do you know what I mean? That it's like, if you're 5% Cherokee, okay, fine. But if there aren't people being like, that guy's probably 5% drunk right now. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like how someone would be racist.
That was an awesome comedy club moment.
Is that why you... Christian, is that why you come to a lot of comedy clubs in a traditional Navajo headdress?
I mean, well, usually I usually don't have time to take it off before I get there. So sometimes it's just easier to arrive.
Where are you going to store it?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it doesn't sit in the overhead bin. It's
store it.
I was on a plane on Tuesday. I don't want to brag, but I flew on a plane.
You went to Miami and back in the same day, you fucking psycho.
Yes. I did a round trip to Miami. I was walking back into my apartment less than 12 hours after I left.
I mean, I understand if I do that for Vegas because it's horrible, but Miami's awesome.
Dude, Miami's listen, if any of your listeners are from Miami, no offense, I find it to be a stultifyingly uninteresting place.
Oh, wow.
Especially this time of year when it's really just unpleasant to be outside.
True.
But I don't know what people do there. I mean, I don't go to clubs, so that's not my thing. The food is, it's fine, but it's nothing spectacular. It's nothing you're going to find anywhere else. And, I don't know what people do there. They just walk around, they go to the gym and they just walk around and sweat. It holds no appeal to me whatsoever. And so
I feel like people drive around in their nice cars.
Yeah.
I think that's like a thing.
Yeah. And that's not going to be an option to me at that point. Yeah. And so I had a 4:00 corporate gig. And so there was an 8:35 flight coming back to the city. So, I was going to have to pay for my own hotel, and it was in Miami Beach. And it's like the cheapest hotel was like $240. Like, no way. Screw it. I'm 49. I've had my Miami time.
Wow.
I did a very quick day in Detroit on Tuesday. So same thing.
Yeah.
I get you.
Yeah. Thank you. Somebody gets me. What I was going to say though is when I was checking in for my flight, there was a dude wearing two hats because he didn't want to check them. He had a baseball hat and then a cowboy hat on top of that.
I love it. But why can't he just fold the baseball? I mean, anyways, I can't get into the mind.
People take their baseball hats very seriously, and I don't know. It's very strange.
Wait a second. I guess so. Do people take their baseball hats very seriously?
I think so. I think a lot of people they spend a lot of money on them. It's like sneakers. I think that there's levels to this.
I think that non-white people take them a lot more seriously than white people. That's my experience.
I think that probably was true at one point, but like most things, it then trickles down to white people as well. Like, the same way that like sneakers didn't used to be a big thing among adult white dudes, and now it is. Yeah.
I mean, I learned a lot about that. I had a crash course in that by being berated for all of my white fashion sensibilities in the early 90s by black students on campus. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was friends with them, so it was like, but I mean, they really were very cruel. I mean, to be fair, my stuff was dirty and beaten up, but where I came from, that was what you did. You wore a really beat up in the late 90s, white guys from where I grew up and places like it.
Oh, yeah. No, I had one pair of shoes through my entire 20s. Like you would not have been able to convince me that there was a reason to have more than one pair of shoes. Why would I need more than one pair of shoes? I only have one set of feet.
I guarantee they were I almost said Doc Browns.
No, but you were correct. So they were
Buster Browns. Were they Buster Browns?
No, they were Doc Martens, which I believe is what Pete was going for. Yes. They were Doc Martens, yes.
But you could wear those Doc Martens for decades. I mean, they're built into.
But the idea of like having different pairs of shoes to match different clothes, like no, that would not have occurred to me. It occurs to me now, but it wouldn't have then.
The Doc Martens are back. They're everywhere.
The idiocy of clothing companies not understanding planned obsolescence, from Doc Martens to Crocs, like they will last forever. How are you going to make money on that if it's not going to fall apart on you?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the mentality. Because you just have to keep telling people they need new things to make them happy.
Yeah.
And so they'll buy Doc Martens in 17 different colors.
And
I mean, that's all it is.
And
I feel like I'm one pair of shoes away from being happy.
Well, hold on a second. Ophira sits here and preaches one thing, but there's something that she recently purchased. We don't know what it is. She'll tell us because she thought it would make her. She's looking at it. You're looking around.
Listen, I was thinking about this the other day because I haven't shopped in a long time. And post-pandemic, I really was like, oh my God, I don't really need all this stuff. But now, that I'm out in front of people all the time, I feel a little bit more of a pull of what's in fashion right now. What are people wearing?
Mm-hmm.
I want to be part of it. And then there is something deep in my soul about September back to school that
Absolutely.
I felt this need to buy myself something. I was like, I need new clothes. It was an obsession. I was
I think Pete and I had this exact conversation one of the weeks that you weren't on, is that just that this is the real beginning of the year and you have that new school clothing feeling. So
I found these notes that I was like, those black wide leg trousers from Zara. I mean, I was writing down notes of things I wanted, like a 12-year-old. I bought a way too expensive red shirt that I'm not sure about. That is hanging in the closet that I haven't put on yet, and the box to send it back is beside it.
I have a hard time spending money on expensive clothes. I always have. It seems like too much to spend. I mean, even with some quality brands, I usually am a discounter. Marshall's. I like my good outdoor gear. I'll spend money on that, but it lasts forever. But when it comes to, I don't know how much you're saying you spend on this shirt, but if you're that indifferent about it.
It was half off, but still more than I would have liked to spend. But I was like, oh, I love this brand. And I will say, sometimes when you have there is a mentality in fashion where don't have 20 tops, have 5 nice tops that fit you well, that are quality.
Yeah.
And that's what you wear.
I don't know about you guys, how big your apartments are, but I've been allotted a very small room in my home. And
allotted.
And I don't have any say in it. And I have a small closet. And because I don't go out much, I realize I really don't. I mean, when I was at Sirius XM, corporate atmosphere, and you want to, it's celebrities coming in and you're interviewing them, and, Alyssa Milano's coming. I want to have a nice shirt or two, but I don't need any of that now. Hey, what are you going to say, Christian?
Milano.
I thought that was a good poll. But
yeah, I mean,
I like that.
Yeah, Jewel. I want to look good.
I'm at that point where it's like I'm super not in the shape I want to be in right now, and I'm I've had to sort of rejigger what I consider my fat clothes twice now since the pandemic started, and I can't. I need new clothes, but I cannot stomach the idea, literally, of buying nice fat clothes. I can't do it.
Right.
And so therefore I either have to buy just garbage, or I wear clothes that I am not comfortable in because I know that I'm not where I would need to be comfortable in them.
Have you thought about slimming down?
Nah.
What an asshole.
Yeah, I know. Says Mr. Metabolism over here. Guy who's never had to even think about his weight ever.
But wait a second.
Have you thought of growing hair?
Ooh.
Hey, mine's genetic. Wait a second. Everything's genetic. No, you're by the way, you're 100% right about metabolism. There's nothing worse than someone like me making that joke, because it's not like I'm working out and eating I am lucky. I did see a photo of me recently.
No, but there's certainly, there's a range for everybody, and I'm at the wrong end of my own personal range. And so that is certainly something I'm trying to address.
So my husband has lost 25 pounds.
Since when?
He's done it over the course of close to a year.
Good for him.
Yeah. So he did it slowly, methodically, but he's 25 pounds slimmer. He cannot believe it. But he tells that speaking of metabolism, just like your body maker, he tells that to any woman and they just roll their eyes.
Yeah.
They're like, somebody's for you. How dare you?
Yeah. By the way, I was looking at a picture of you. You tweeted out a picture of your husband, your son, first day of school or something, and he's a good-looking guy. He's a very good-looking guy, your husband. Just saying.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks, man.
I guess. All right. Well.
Agreed.
And he's definitely
he's a fine-looking fellow.
Wearing one of these beat up white guy hats I was just referring to in this picture as well.
Oh yeah,
Ophira's husband. If you want to know, Ophira's husband has always to me, and this maybe it's because he had like I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. He had a mustache and like a little soul patch the last time I saw him, like a very thin mustache. He kind of looks like some sort of Renaissance prince or something, like or like the villain in a Three Musketeers book or something. You know what I mean? Like the evil Duke.
Like, the fourth Musketeer, the Dark Musketeer.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't know that story at all.
Or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Throw them in the dungeon. or he looks like a jack in a deck of cards. You know, like.
Oh, that is so good. That is so good. I'm going to relay all of this to him.
Let's talk about another thing you can relate to, and we'll see if anybody else can, or if you're all alone on this. Ophira tweeted, I was just struck by this memory. As a child, when my parents would entertain, my dad would give tours of our house. It wasn't that big, but I think since they came to Canada with nothing, he was so proud of it. Did anyone else's parents do this? Christian, you've talked a lot about your parents, but do you have any way to relate to that?
No one ever came into my house. It was
no way. Come on.
No, never. Very rarely. There's always kids who have kids over to their house, and there's kids who go to other kids' houses. I was always a go over to other kids' house kid.
So Jonathan also didn't have didn't have kids over. It was like a whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't know what that. I mean, well, I do know what it was in my particular situation because my mother was Cocoa Puffs, but no, nobody really came over, and so I don't think the rare times when like a kid would be over my house, we would just stand there awkwardly because we wouldn't really know what to do, and then eventually be like, "Do you want to just go over your house?" It just seems better that way. But no, my dad never showed. I don't think anybody ever saw the inside of our house.
I mean, I think it is such a weird thing, and I feel like it must be of a certain time, this idea that someone would be like, oh, we're having, so-and-so over from wherever, the neighborhood, and then they would walk in and would be like, do you want a tour? And traipse everybody up.
That is a very weird thing, like a tour.
It's so weird. So weird.
Yeah.
It's not important that I see your guest bathroom.
I know, it's weird. I know he was like, literally, like it was 100% like bragging, showing off. That's what it was, but somehow acceptable. Did your parents do that, Pete?
No, we didn't. No, they had a lot of people over. I don't think my dad ever. No, for sure not. People didn't even go upstairs. Probably the vast majority of people came to our house. Probably, never saw. I
think about my brother's house, and I'm like, I've never been upstairs. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think an adult should have other adults upstairs unless it's like a key party. That should be the only reason.
What happens at key parties when everybody has a combo lock to get in their house?
Oh, that does make it a little awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever even heard of our generation's orgies? Like, I don't know anybody who does anything like, much less swapping wives. Like, I don't even know anecdotally and that is a very private thing if it happens, I think. Yeah.
Or the other way where it's now just called like a throuple, polyamory. Like it's just been normalized.
Yeah. And part of me wonders, was it really a thing, or was it just kind of like, when you read like the New York Times style section, they'll be like, the new trend is, garbanzo beaning or something. And it's something that you've never heard anybody do, but it's just like some dumb style piece that somebody wrote. Like part of me wonders if that's true about like suburban key parties and stuff. Did people actually do that? I don't know.
By the way, I just read about a new trend that I think this will not take off, but it's psychodermatology. So basically it's that you can manifest better skin.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
And what is that? How does one do this? Like,
I guess you have it's all in the same bucket of relieving stress, buy yourself, like Pete just bought himself a meditation chair. Just remember, it's different than a chair.
No, just to be clear.
Isn't any chair a meditation chair if you meditate in it?
This is just to be clear, my meditation chair is a chair that is comfortable for me to sit in with my legs, my feet together, like with the arms are close enough that my groin doesn't pull when I sit kind of cross-legged that way. That's it. That's my meditation chair. It was a chair that lived in the living room downstairs. It's now my meditation chair. It's where it was basically me working in that I meditate. Let's be honest.
Okay, cool.
Cool. Yeah. I just think in terms of this generation, I was just saying that in a quote traditional marriage, I don't hear anything like that happening. My brother's polyamorous, but he's always been sexually fluid, like always. I'm not surprised by his lifestyle. Have you heard oh my God, did you hear that Mike and Carol do a swap with the neighbors? I've never heard that.
No one talks to their neighbors. Maybe that's the problem.
That might be it. Could possibly.
Although I was talking to someone an acquaintance who was telling me he's in a throuple, and the thing, we just had that kind of. I asked all these questions. I'm sure he gets asked thousands of times by anyone, just, intro questions. But the one thing that struck me is I was talking about how, so many people's mattresses in marriages supposedly need to be replaced because as you sleep, the longer you're married, the more you kind of gravitate to the far sides of your mattress. So there's like a river running down the middle of it.
Yeah. See, ours is the exact opposite. Like to me, there's it's like an inverted V.
Oh, you have a hill.
Yeah, we have a hill in the middle of the mattress.
Yeah. So he was like, "Yeah, that's where I sleep," and I cannot stop thinking about how I would reject the concept based on that.
How quaint! How quaint! People sleeping with their spouses.
No, man. I forgot. Oh, that's I forgot that is a novel concept.
Well, there were stages, but just to be clear, this is in my act, but I used to go to bed. There would be a wall of pillows. She would build a wall. Not joking at all.
I forgot about that. Yeah, you did have that bit.
Christian, I just wanted to ask you real quickly and get your reaction to Sophira. You have no problem speaking ill of the dead. Ken Starr died this week, and you tweeted, "Can't wait to drink a gallon of water within walking distance of his grave." What's that mean?
Just that grief is dehydrating by nature, and after all of the weeping I'll be doing for our long lost Mr. Dr. Starr, I believe he was an honorary doctor.
Yes.
I don't even know if that's true, but I'll probably need to refresh.
Yeah, I didn't know what you meant.
That's probably what that means. Yeah. I think that's what I meant.
Okay, final question for both of you. It's what's keeping you up at night? Be vulnerable and share. It could be anything from financial, worrying about money, career, relationships. It could be about, the existential threats to the human race, from climate change to war, to civil war. Well, what's concerning you, if anything, at all? Because there's always something, right, Ophira?
Wow, you brought up all the good ones. But that was a great list of also that.
I wasn't staying awake at night until you made that list.
I was thinking about how, what's keeping me up at night? How, I don't know, for post-pandemic, whatever situation that we're in now, it's like there's so many relationships in my life, including some family members, that we haven't seen each other in so long. We got off of the track of seeing each other in person, and now it's not a year that has passed. It's like almost 3 years that have passed.
Yeah.
And what I would that. Do I value these things? Do I have to put it back on track? I was thinking about with my brother. I was like, I haven't seen my brother in 3 years, and it is not like he has called me up and said, "When are you coming to see me?" So I was like, and it used to just be kind of a rotation that we understood.
That's interesting. That's really fascinating.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I'm sure.
And you don't want to have to be the one to sort of instigate it. You want to be
pursued.
Pursued by your own family members.
I get, my mother used to always say this thing that drove us all crazy, because many of us lived in a different city than her as we grew up. And she would say, well, I'm waiting to be invited. And everyone would just go, Mom, just say that you want to come over. Like it was, but she had this thing about like, I'm waiting to be invited. And I feel like I have a little bit of that.
I get it.
Yeah. Waiting to be invited.
Christian, what's keeping you up at night?
My generally the idea that I have no idea what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
Like, so small.
Truly, I have no clue. Don't really know what the next 20 years is going to be about for me. So, but other than that, everything's great.
Well, you've always got a place here, so hopefully that helps you get a wink.
20 years. How about you focus on like January? Like, I don't know, that 20 years, that would drive anyone nuts.
Yeah, I suppose so. But it's just, we don't need to get into this here. I'm not paying you enough to listen to that. But no, it is definitely kind of this feeling of like, all right, well, if the pandemic's over, time to go back to work. Oh, right, I have none. So listen, it's
Mr. Corporate in Miami over here.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, very prestigious. I literally performed for 45 people in a conference room.
Who books it?
Yeah,
folks,
exactly. I take it.
Christian Ophira, this was fun. Thank you for joining me.
Always.
I always love it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Petey.
All right, Christian Finnegan, Ophira, Eisenberg, there they go. Please take a moment today at some point during your day and go on the social media, the Instagram and the Twitter and the Facebook and say, hey, I'm following you, I support you, and I always love to hear you on Stand Up with Pete because they are always great, and I love them so much. And thank you again to Luke Mogelson and everybody who is subscribing to this show. And if you're listening but not yet subscribing, it would be awesome if you did. I could use the support. I'm not getting rich over here, but we're sustaining it. We're keeping it up. That's not the phrase I wanted to use. We're doing it each and every day, and I'm psyched to have you listening, and I would love to have you subscribing. Go down to standupwithpete.com, and that is all I'm going to say, although there will be a special episode over the weekend. Special episode, look for that, and that is all I've got for you. John Carroll had a procedure yesterday. We're thinking about him. He's fine. He reached out to me. He sings a song to us every day, and we want him to live forever. JohnCarroll.org. Go buy it for just $3 if you haven't done that yet. Come on now. I love you guys. Be the change you want to see. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. Stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Can't deny what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no one a voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up